Let's turn our volume up. We're ready?
If somebody else wants.
No, it hasn't come
All good?
through. It's last
Okay, we're on.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody to the General Committee meeting. I declare the meeting open. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gubbi Gubbi or Cubbi Cubbi people, and pass on our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have no apologies. We have confirmation of the minutes is the first item. Do we have someone to confirm the minutes for the last general? Yep. That's Councillor Finzel, seconded Mayor Stewart. All in favour? That's carried. We have no presentations, no deputations, and we have items referred from various committees and staff here to answer. And councillors, just begin with a friendly reminder about questions that when we're asking questions of staff, it's primarily for the purpose of eliciting information. If you're like me, occasionally you use the introduction to the question as an opportunity to make a comment, but if we can refrain from doing that out of courtesy to the staff and save our comments for our debate, of which there'll be plenty, that would be much appreciated. So the first item is the request to change an existing approval for multiple housing type 3 requirement and special needs commercial business type 2 medical and reconfiguring a lot 1 into 2 lots at Grasstree Court and Ben Lexcen Drive, Sunrise Beach. And we have Kerry, Patrick and Connor here. Councillor Terrace.
Question for staff. I know in the report it talks about there being no increase in gross floor area, but elsewhere I see it talking about amended setbacks and revised setbacks. Can you explain why, if there's no increase in gross floor area, we've got changes to setback?
Joe, do you mind referring me to the part of the report where you're talking about?
On page 22 refers there's no increase in gross floor area, but I'm reading elsewhere there's changes to setbacks. And I haven't got the specifics of where it says that, but I note that from reading through the report that talks about setback changes.
Yeah. So what you're referring to on page 22 was a comment that was provided by the applicant. There has in fact been a reduction in gross floor area for the residential aged care building, and the form of the building has changed. There's more separation. It's more sort of almost 4 different wings now, and then
because they've sort of been corralled around the central focus as opposed to what they were.
That's correct.
Okay, and so that's where the setback's going.
That's right.
It's the configuration of the arrangement that's actually changed, not necessarily the size of the buildings themselves.
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, I thought that was the explanation, but it just sort of didn't get that from the report. Thank you.
Councillor Stockwell.
So to follow up from that, I suppose it's not really gross floor area that impacts on the footprint of the building, and we've talked about, in the report talks about no significant changes in that regard. Perhaps this is one to our ecologists. Can you summarise, is this proposal any better or worse from a retention of glossy black habitat than what is already approved?
It is overall a better outcome because the glossy black food trees in the northeastern corner are further set back from the construction elements of the development.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Kerry, do we have a map of the site that we can put up on the screen, please, so we can look at what we're talking about?
Page 23, the image. Is that what you're looking for?
Oh, the glossy blacks. Yeah.
Yeah, so could we start, for the benefit of people who may be watching at home, or could you point out the extent of the full extent of the site that we're talking about?
Well, those...
The original site and then the subdivision, so we...
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, page...
24?
I think page 24 is a better indication of what the original subject site was.
Yeah.
Which shows the mapping, so...
the first drawing, figure 2.
So that yellow area is zoned for community services?
Yeah, so the northern lot hasn't changed. The southern lot, there was, I believe, 4.4 hectares of land that was dedicated to council for conservation purposes, and there was some rezoning, and so the amount of area that's been able to be developed on that southern lot is significantly less than what that lot shape is currently showing, and it's less than that yellow area, which was the community services area at the time.
So my understanding is that that yellow area in the big area bounded by the purple on the south there, that yellow area is essentially cut in half almost.
Yes.
Yeah. And the bottom portion of the yellow will also join the balance of the site as a nature refuge.
Yeah, by resolution of council, that was absorbed into the nature refuge. So an additional 4.4 hectares was put into the Cooroy Nature Refuge for conservation purposes.
And what is the sum total of the Cooroy Nature Refuge in terms of area?
Sorry, Frank. It's probably around about 100 hectares. Around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't think of it.
Even further, maybe.
Yeah. It's huge. It joins the national park. So if you look at it in all one big ecological context, it's a massive piece of land. You possibly see it in I think it was page 22 on the aerial shot.
Page 23.
Page 23. Sorry,
Yeah.
Carly. So yeah, as all the basically the green area there is all nature refuge and national park, which all have the same conservation protection status.
Can I ask, in regards to the feed trees and koala trees on the site, has there been a recent audit of those trees that's factored in the dying trees and ageing trees?
No, the last audit on that site was in November 2018, where it was on both of the two sites, the RAC site, which is the northern lot, and the southern lot, the lot 9, that identified all the glossy black food trees.
So is that potentially a concern, given that the condition is to retain only the identified trees, and if they're dead and dying, will that mean that the amount of trees retained is going to be considerably less?
It could, or it could mean that there's more.
More.
Based on the survey, it's quite a comprehensive one. In November 2018, there was something like 71 food trees, and they were graded into low, medium, and high usage. So of the 71, approximately a third was again high usage. So it represented a succession of aging food tree preferences.
And just to remind councillors, this is a change application, so council can really only consider the changes that are proposed as part of this application. So that's only in relation to the aged care facility the changes are proposed.
Yeah.
Could you, for those of us who weren't here on Tuesday, could you talk us through how this development was going to be staged in relation to these two lots that we see here? Where's the development going to occur first, and in what order?
I think we'd go to the, is that the staging plan you have there? Okay. So the green area,
The northern lot?
the northern lot is stage 1.
So it's on page 37 of the agenda for those who are watching at home.
And then stage 2 being the central facilities and co-located apartment, and 50% of the villas is the area in white. Then the stage 3 being the remaining villas in yellow or mustard, and then stage 4 being the 4 apartment buildings to the western portion of the southern lot.
So just to clarify, stage 1 is essentially between the existing Sunrise Beach Shopping Centre and the church,
That's correct.
and stage 2, 3 and 4 are to the south of that off
Grasstree
called?
Court.
Grasstree Court.
That's correct.
I also have a question about how fire risk is managed on this site. I note that there was an evacuation plan that has to be signed off by council, but my understanding is evacuating residents is not ideal. So how is it fire risk going to be managed on this site?
Well, they've provided 3 peer-reviewed bushfire management plans, and they're using asset protection zones, like setback areas, setback from the hazardous vegetation, ranging between 12 and 20 metres. They've got firefighting trails around the western and southern portion of Lot 9, the bigger lot. In the northern lot, the RAC one that we're looking at now, they've got a western access fire control line, and they've also used building design, they call it the bushfire attack level design. So they're building to withstand radiant heat from the bushfires and treating the northern face and the roof to a high bushfire standard, and then the other faces of the building to a lesser standard. And they've also included a evacuation plan as well. So they've covered off on the defence. They've covered off on the asset protection zones, the access to the flame front, sheltering in place, and evacuation.
So when you say sheltering in place, that's because the buildings are designed to be heavily fire resistant?
To an extent, yeah. As in any bushfire, as we've known, nothing is, so it'll be up to the managers on the site to, when it's in an extreme or catastrophic fire weather, to make a call on whether to evacuate or shelter in place. Their advice is to evacuate early if they're going to do that. So it all depends on the bushfire season. Given that this RAC site, the Lot 6, is located within the buffer to the hazard rather than the hazard itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Connor, you mentioned something like 71 feed trees in the area.
Yeah.
Within the current allotment design, how many of those trees are likely to be retained?
9, I think.
9.
Yeah.
So 9 have been earmarked to be retained.
And yeah, so the northeastern corner and the one down the side.
Now, you mentioned there was a benefit in this design over the previous design. How was that? Where was that benefit being derived from 9 trees now to what was previously?
Well, it's more about the construction impacts to do with the stormwater quality devices at the rear, to keep them further away from the trees, and also trying to incorporate design elements within the stormwater devices so that they have watering holes in the actual stormwater devices, so that the glossies can actually water there as well.
Now, the creek adjoining the site on that between the school and the site is significantly weed infested in some areas. Has there been any consideration with the developer to look at any works of weed management between the sites?
Well, we've been liaising with the developers to engage with the local community to address the bush care groups and try and work in with them in providing ecological benefits throughout the area.
So could be some scope for better improvements for glossy black habitat by removing those weeds?
Yeah, it's outside the scope of this planning approval, but it is within the scope of their PR.
Thank you.
Sorry, Connor, in regard, I think you mentioned, I could be wrong on this, in regard to the vegetation management program, are we replanting, or is it replanting at 8 to 1? Is that correct?
That's, yeah, that figure was derived where we're for all the trees, yeah, so we got 71 times 8 is basically, that's the formula we're using. And the seeds have already been collected and they're stored by a Cooroy nursery at the moment, and they're ready to propagate them, and I think they've already been giving them out to the community on planting days already. So that's, yeah, we've yet to enact the ecological restoration plan or the vegetation management plan, because it's contingent on the clearing occurring, because then it's going to use the material from the clearing to rehabilitate the Cooroy Nature Refuge site.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Tim.
Quick question. So that before they were going to level both lots at the same time,
Yes.
but now the much bigger lot, lot 9, they're going to put that on standby until they're ready to do it, which is actually another benefit for our cockatoos.
Yeah. So it's at the moment, So lot 6, the one that we're considering now, that's the 0.8 hectares, and that will be cleared as part of this stage. The rest of the stages won't be cleared until they're enacted. So they have to revise their vegetation management plan to address the staging as it stands now.
It sounds like a little bit of the bite at the apple when it comes to facilitating our glossy black cockatoos.
Yeah.
The conditions are set by the approval of PAP, and there's a number of measures that they're required to do. So the staging of the clearing, I think, is of benefit because they're only clearing for the aged care. They don't clear the southern property until they are ready to proceed with that development.
But as far as the timing goes of the staging, have they given any time frame, any proposed time frame for each of those stages to go, or is that just open to when the needs or their progress of development occurs?
Well, I think initially, say 6-8 months ago, they were probably looking to develop the southern part of the site first, and that's now changed. The Blue Care are very keen to move forward with the development of the northern stage, and I think COVID's had a bit of an effect in terms of the willingness to develop the southern extent of the site. So certainly intended to do the development, but probably not as urgent as what it had recently
Probably been a bit of revision of aged care facilitation around the country as a result of COVID as well, I would imagine.
Potentially. Yeah.
And just to clarify, because of the subdivision that occurred, 4.4 hectares of the site which could have been cleared will no longer be cleared.
Yes, it's all in public ownership, protected under the Nature Conservation Act and part of the Cooroy Nature Refuge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connor, I just have a question with regard to the replanting of the trees.
Yep.
Because the black cockatoos are a totem of a local Indigenous family, and they've asked me to speak today on their behalf in the Sunshine Beach community. Can you just tell us how long it takes for a tree, when we do the replanting, for the tree to be mature so that the birds can feed from the tree and nest in the tree? How long does that take?
Well, okay, for it to produce viable seeds, I've actually collected them off this site and I planted them in my place, and that was 6 years ago, and they're heavily seeding, probably 2 years, so 4 years to seed. Whether they're going to be the ones that the glossy blacks eat, but yeah, so I've selected them off the actual food trees and then grown them up, and so 4 to 5 years. That's probably in a good, because I nurtured them, so maybe between 4 and 8 years to become a viable food tree, and that's if the glossies decide to eat them. And then and their longevity is they're quite fickle. They can fall over in 10 years. They can fall over in 20 years. It depends on where they're growing, but they're a short-lived species. They're what we'd call a pioneer species or a ruderal species.
And that leads to my question with regard to the understanding that they don't tend to regenerate until they've fallen down. These disturbance of the site, i.e. the canopy goes and actually can expose the seed being underneath. So whilst we might have healthy trees,
is this a question, Joe?
It is a question. I am asking a question. Whilst the canopy, until the canopy is cleared or the seed is disturbed, that you won't get that regrowth. Is that correct?
Yeah. So disturbance ecology is all about creating a gap in the canopy for the emergence to come through.
Thank you.
And it was mentioned before, but you're saying Blue Care is working with the community in terms of propagating the seeds and sharing seeds that they've been collected from site?
This is what I'm hearing from their ecological consultant, is that they have been propagating and giving out trees, and so that's what I've been hearing from their consultant. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor.
One more question, if I may. So, with regard to street plantings, I know Councillor Stockwell in the past has talked about the Grasstree Court having been lined with casuarinas, and some of the street plantings that we're doing with clearing around Sunrise Beach at the moment. Are we looking at glossy black feed trees? Is that being some of the plants being replanted there to regenerate the habitat around the area?
Yeah, in subsequent approvals from this will be the lower order approvals, the landscaping approvals. We haven't approved those, but that's the intention. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to move a motion and amend to add an advisory note on condition 14D that the developer is encouraged to liaise cooperatively with local community groups to deliver, and I emphasise maintain, the required glossy black food tree recovery programs.
So you're moving that, Councillor Lawrenson. It's basically the staff recommendation with added clause D.
Point D, yeah.
We have a seconder for that, please.
I'll second it.
Seconded Councillor Stewart. Councillor Lawrenson, you don't need to stand.
Okay, sorry. We already have a requirement for the applicant to be responsible for managing the offset planting. That is a binding obligation under the terms of the planning approval. The site's going to be maintained for a period of 5 years only. And that's why I was a little bit concerned with that time frame, 5 years only. So I thought that it's critical that some type of an environmental type stewardship style program be established to maintain or continue the commitment to achieve the conditions of the approval and the appropriate ecological outcomes after the 5-year management period expires. I'm confident, given Lendlease's level of genuine interest in the glossy blacks, which we've just discussed, that this recommendation will be considered. Also, I'd just like to note that to date, Lendlease have provided the Burgess Creek Group 1,000 feed trees for the glossy black cockatoos to be planted in Rainbow Park, and my understanding have shown a genuine interest in working with the community to protect the glossies and their habitat. I'd also like to take this opportunity to stress that it's a privilege and a unique opportunity for the residents and the families of Blue Care to be living in a habitat of endangered species. It's also a massive responsibility that I hope they take seriously, and hence why I've added the advisory note.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrenson. The other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Stockwell.
Oh, well, I think for me, as I've said before, if I was here when the initial decision was made, and if the extension was to become before council, I was likely not to support this development for conservation reasons. But that's not the decision in front of us. We've heard today that this development has made only minor and largely cosmetic or architectural changes, and those changes result in a slight improvement in terms of retaining a buffer to existing feed trees. I also think it's important that we've mentioned in the questioning both the concept of intermittent disturbance hypothesis, which is in these areas, the whole ecosystem is based on being disturbed on an intermittent but regular basis, and these ecosystems of the Wallam that we're looking at here would not exist if it wasn't for thousands of years of fire stick farming. So we're going to have, in years to come, a real juxtapose in these areas, in that if we want to manage the ecosystem, we will need to introduce and maintain fire. But because of now the sensitivity to fire, it's likely that we might go for a fire regime which may be too frequent and too cool to actually achieve the continual reoccurrence of the desired species. So we have to watch out. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that there's been this commendable interest in the glossy black, but there is another vulnerable and listed bird that lives in the ecosystem just downhill, and that's the ground parrot. And research has shown that if you don't have fires for a 10-year period, you have a form of growth that makes it that ruins their habitat. They can't breed it successfully. It gets too many medium to tall shrubs. So it's important when we look at these things to base the planning decision on the evidence in front of us, but also when we look at why we want to conserve things, is we look at it from an ecosystem basis and realise any ecosystem beside an urban area is always going to have compromised objectives.
The other councillors wish to talk to the motion?
Yeah, look,
Councillor Joe.
I think Councillor Stockwell alluded to the issue that what we've got before us is an amendment to a minor change to a development approval that's already been given and all the rest of it. And I understand the community concern with regard to the glossy black feed recovery programs that are associated with development, or the loss of habitat potentially of this this development. But that's not what we can deal with today. But it is good to hear that that the developer has already started to engage and work with the community to try and achieve outcomes for the glossy blacks in the area. And I'm sure that whilst we're losing an element of habitat here, as Councillor Stockwell said, an element of disturbance is required to ensure the recovery and regrowth of these trees for the future. So the seed bank being moved, some areas of significant disturbance already potentially being recovered on the list, and further 4 hectares, as you pointed out, of environmental land being recovered here is a good outcome for the community for the future.
Yes, look, Councillor Stockwell's already covered off on the points about intermittent disturbance hypothesis that I was going to raise.
That was the nature of my question.
So Joe was going there as well. But I support this this motion and Councillor Amelia's addition to that. As alluded to before, perhaps if we were back in 2006, when the decision was made to set aside this land, which has the biodiversity overlay, environmental protection area overlay, and fire hazard overlay, to community services, perhaps it'd be a different result. And also, as we know, the approval was given in 2011 under amalgamated council, but we're here today and trying to get the best outcome from where we are. It's a pragmatic decision, and I'm really encouraged to hear what Councillor Lawrenson has shared with us, that over 1,000 feed trees have already been provided by the builder associated with the applicant to the Burgess Creek group, and also that perhaps there's a great likelihood that in future, when the trees are propagated, over 560 trees are propagated from the 71 on site, that both the Blue Care and the community be able to work together to find appropriate site for them. I know our staff are working with the environmental consultants hired by Blue Care. It's about getting the best result from where we find ourselves, and good opportunity for all parties to work together in the interests of the glossy black. I support this motion.
Can I close?
You may close if no one else wants to speak. Yeah.
I'd just like to close with a quote.
Gandhi?
Not Gandhi. Sorry, Brett. We are temporary caretakers of our land. To be sustainable for future generations, we must leave our land better than we found it.
Okay. Well said. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Connor. The next item is the MCU Planning and Environment Court Appeal number D67 of 2020, application for a bar at 5 Taylor Court, Cooroy.
What page number?
54.
Yeah, page 54.
Yeah, 54 of the Environmental Planning Portfolio Agenda. Councillors, any questions of Kerry? I have a question. So, Kerry, the outcome that's being presented here is consistent with the planning scheme's intent for the site?
Yes, the outcome is going to maintain the primary use of the site as industrial, and they have demonstrated that the bar will really only operate in a sort of ancillary sort of type capacity and support the industrial use on the site.
And could you talk about the differences between an ancillary bars, the risks associated with a full-scale bar at that site, as opposed to just an ancillary bar at that site, which is adjacent to a major highway away from transport?
So the reason the application was originally recommended for refusal to councillors was that the proposal had a lot extended hours, was of a greater floor area, was going to sell liquor, not just what they produced on site, that it would really just operate as a bar, so anybody working in the industrial area could attend regularly, like their Friday afternoon bar, and that would become the primary use of the site, being a sort of retail outlet. So what the applicant has agreed to through discussions in the appeal was to reduce that quite substantially. So hours have been reduced, floor area has been reduced. They're now only proposing to retail the liquor they sell, to promote that, their product. And so really it remains a much more scaled back version of what was originally proposed and will really only operate in an ancillary way.
Thank you.
Actually, can I get clarification there? Because I thought from the original proposal the operators were only planning to operate the bar Friday, Saturday, weekends and public holidays. What has changed in the number of hours that are proposed for the bar to be operational?
So on page 57 of the report, the first point says reduced hours of operation from Friday 3 p.m. till midnight and weekends 12 p.m. to midnight. Now they're only proposing Friday 3 p.m. till 8 p.m. and weekends and public holidays 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. So the hours are scaled back.
The closing time has been reduced.
So the closing time.
That's essentially the change on those days.
Yeah, because a typical.
But again, it was only Friday, weekends, and public holidays are intended to operate.
Yeah, so a typical retail bar would open till midnight, but being a tasting facility, they've really scaled back their hours in line with that.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Kerry, I would suggest that this is what I would consider a successful mediated outcome. Would you agree? And if so, why was it so successful? Was it because the applicant came to the table wanting to negotiate, and likewise with council?
Absolutely. So the mediation was very successful and was quite surprising, I guess, to myself, because obviously before going into mediation, you try and work out some solutions that you can put forward. But the discussions progressed where staff put forward the issues in the appeal, and the applicant was very flexible in coming back going, well, this is what we could do to address those issues. So congratulations to the applicant on working with officers and coming to something that will work for them and address our issues.
Right, a win-win outcome.
Definitely.
I see from, following on from that, I see from page 57, the top of page 57 says the applicant put forward a range of conditions to reflect their proposed intent for the bar, including the following. Was that, my understanding is that they had initially proposed some of these. What additional conditions did they apply to themselves in this proposal that differed from what was, apart from the operating hours, that differed from what was originally proposed?
Well, all those dot points on page 57 are really different to what was originally proposed.
They are all significant. I noticed the bus was one, courtesy bus, which was one of the ones that the staff were concerned with. Were television screens in that proposed in the original?
It was shown on the plans, yes.
Oh, they were, okay.
Yes.
The size of the bar was reduced too, is that correct?
Yeah, so the size, the bar itself is the same, but they've clarified they're no longer using the mezzanine, and the area around for dining is limited to a size. Yeah.
Thank you, that clarifies.
Someone care to move the motion?
Brian's got a question.
I'll be Brian.
Yes, I'll move the staff recommendation with a small additional clause in there. I'll read out the additional clause, and that's an item B to read: include the following advisory note on the development approval. 1. The proposed bar is located in an area that is zoned low impact industry.
Not medium.
Under the Noosa Plan 2020, and a range of industrial uses are planned to establish that may generate noise, odour, dust, waste, nuisance or the like. These industrial businesses will not be required to include additional measures to address the potential impacts from these industrial uses on the bar, given that they should reasonably be expected.
I'll second it.
Seconded, Councillor Jurcevic. Councillor Stockman.
Yeah, I do so. I think the questions have highlighted that what has been negotiated through the mediation process is that the size and scale and the nature of the operation, which was of concern initially, has been agreed to at a point where it is now considered an ancillary use to the primary distillery function. I'm quite happy with that. I believe that the only then potential long-term issue is that in an industrial estate we have had issues before with these sort of uses of the reverse amenity effect, where people think that other industrial uses should curb their production in order to maintain a level of amenity not normally associated with industrial estates. So that advisory note just highlights that this is still considered an industrial estate, and it's likely that there will be noise, odour, dust, waste, nuisance and the like occurring. So you won't always have an ideal gin sipping environment.
Kerry, is this a change in what would happen anyway? Is it? What Brian is suggesting, it seems to be obvious, but it seems in the past there have been people who have moved into industrial areas and then start complaining about the noise and the dust and so forth. So this amendment will actually make a difference then to what may happen in the future.
Yeah, so it is an advisory note, and it's about, I guess, putting the applicant on alert, or to bring to their attention that we will not be taking on compliance action on other industrial uses where they start to potentially impact on the bar, as have other businesses in the industrial area that are more retail in nature, not industrial, and have expected us to go and ask the mechanic to be quieter to lower their noise. So it's really bringing to their attention that this is an industrial area and there will be some noise and impacts that may impact their bar.
That always seems obvious, but here maybe it's not obvious. And should Brian have made motions like this earlier concerning various aspects to the other industrial areas where people are complaining?
The ones that we've received complaints about don't have a planning approval in the first instance. So, yeah.
So, following on from that question, I've had a similar question of a similar nature. Is this something that we should perhaps consider as a standard clause in adding to the bottom of approvals for commercial type activities in industrial areas?
I think it is appropriate on sites where we approve a business that's not industrial in nature, that potentially other industrial uses might impact. So yes. Or
where they have a complementary use to an industrial activity, such as a bar, tasting bar, to what clearly is an industrial operation in the distillery activity.
Yeah. I think it puts on note for people.
Okay, thank you.
Kerry, would it be applicable in the instance of caretaker units? So we're talking ancillary commercial use, but I see it more relevant with caretaker units that have been approved in industrial precincts.
If it's a genuine caretaker where they are caretaking the industrial use, then in my mind they should have every expectation that there is a business here that's going to impact on them. So I'm not sure it is as necessary for caretakers as it is for this one.
But there have been approved secondary dwellings, not necessarily caretaker units in industrial zones.
No, there have only been caretakers' residents approved.
Are they caretakers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's an understanding or an expectation that noise, dust is nature of the beast.
Yeah,
I think you're both right, but the issue here is that we would give the advice to the owner of that caretaker unit or industrial shed or whatever it might be. But sometimes the tenant might not be aware of that. And it'll be their expectations we probably need to manage as much as the owner of the property.
But, and a caretaker's not going to see this development approval.
No, that's the issue.
I'll talk to it. I think it's a great outcome. It shows that saying no to a development application doesn't mean no entirely. It often means that there are elements within, and only elements within, that need to be reviewed and looked at, and that's clearly what's occurred here. An understanding of an applicant that an industrial area is for industrial use first and foremost, and that other uses are secondary. Again, if this is something they want to develop, it's an opportunity to grow, develop, and transfer the bar activities to an area where they're probably potentially more suitable if they're going to be a more primary use rather than ancillary use. But I think this shows that saying no to a development application and going through a negotiated outcome to try and come up with a compromise that both parties can agree to, which does meet the planning scheme, and with an advisory note such as this to understand that the use of industrial areas, particularly low impact industrial areas, can generate a suitable operation and a growth and development of a new industry for the region.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
I'll just say a quick couple of words. I won't repeat my the speech from last time about the nature of spirits and the spirit of testing, but I will congratulate us on.
Should we raise a glass to
that? Just that we're these industrial zones. We're moving toward a more enterprise concept of industrial areas and the like, where they make a product and then they want to sell that product within the building at the same time. They want people to come through and try and see the product, and that's a very nice entrepreneurial way of dealing in it in industrial zones. And I'm just happy we're going that direction where they're able to sell and have their shop in the front there, even though it's a tiny little unit there. Actually, it's 2 units in this one, isn't it, that have put together. So I'm glad that we're going that way and finding nice solutions moving forward, because I think that's the strength of Noosa, is our small businesses, our entrepreneurs getting out there and having a go. But man, if they make it there, they want to be able to sell it in the front.
Thank you. Councillor Stocker, you wish to close? Put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, Kerry. The next item is a confidential item, and unless there's any strong objection, we'll move that to the end of the agenda. The next.
Do we want a motion to that effect?
No, it's at the discretion of the chairman.
Is it? Yeah. I should read my standing order.
Yes. So that brings us. Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks,
that brings us
Kerry.
to item 4, which is local governance reform. And that item's here because of the significance for all councillors.
That's out of the services and organisation.
Services and organisation.
Thank you, Virginia. Sorry.
Thank you, yes.
Page 17. Chair, do you want me to give a go to you? It's a pretty
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
it's a long report.
Yeah.
If you're having trouble sleeping at night, this was a good one to read.
I haven't been able to get through it. I'm sleeping 5 minutes.
Yeah, it is. Look, what this is about is that the state government has been doing a series of reforms to governance of councils across Queensland for a number of years, and a lot of these have been triggered by, let's be blunt, some pretty poor governance in some of the councils, you know, the Ipswiches of the world and Logan and so on. So the state government's had to take some action. What they've done in the latest tranche of changes that took effect on the 12th of October from memory, there was a lot of training and publicity around the changes to the conflict of interest, and that's where most of the interest was focused on that. But there were a range of other changes as well. So they, for example, updated the Council Code of Conduct, updated issues about investigation policies and so on. So it was an opportunity to go back and put together a package of documents, which we're presenting to you now, to update a lot of those documents. So what this report does is to provide an updated Council Code of Conduct. That's the same Code of Conduct that applies to all councillors across Queensland. So that's attached for adoption. And my suggestion would be that if the council adopts that on Thursday night, which I expect it will, that we might do a little signing ceremony. Each councillor acknowledges and agrees to be bound by that. Very similar to what you did when you did your induction. The swearing-in ceremony. So it's just been updated.
Just to confirm that includes Brisbane City Council for the first time, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah,
So
all councils.
Correct. There's actually 2 acts that cover local government in Queensland: the Local Government Act and the City of Brisbane Act. Brisbane has its own act, and over the last few years, they've slowly been merging the 2 into the one system. So Brisbane's now getting picked up by a lot of this as well. The other thing that we've done is to update the standing orders for those councillors who in the previous term, we did a lot of detailed work on those last time, but there are some required changes in the standing orders as a result of these legislative changes. Some of the examples include there's changes to the reasons why we can and can't close council meetings or committee meetings. That's now been updated in the standing orders. There's standard requirements in there that the state government has what they call model meeting procedures, which is about what processes we need to follow if there's complaints and so on. They've been incorporated. So we've updated the standing orders as well, and I think Kylie was good enough to send around a track changes version so you can see the difference between the old and the new. Again, just for those who are having trouble sleeping at night. The other one that this covers is what's called an investigation policy. So that's one we've never actually used yet in the years we've had it. But it's the case where if there's a complaint made to the Office of the Independent Assessor about a councillor and it's a relatively minor matter, sometimes the Office of the Independent Assessor can send it back to the council to undertake an investigation of that councillor. Doesn't happen that often, but we need to have a policy, and it's a standard policy, again, which the state government has now updated. So we're just finalising that. But probably the most significant one in this bundle, which I do want to draw to council's attention, is the final one, which is a policy on councillor briefing sessions and workshops. So these are the non-statutory meetings. We've never had a policy on this before. And I'll just spend a bit of time talking about this and why we've done it and why I think it's important. The starting point is that councillor briefing sessions, every council in Queensland has these. It's not unique to Noosa, it's very common practice. And they're called different things in different councils. Sometimes it's briefing sessions, they're workshops, they're forums. Every council uses different terminology. Across all of Queensland, it is absolutely verboten or very clear that they are not decision-making forums. They are places where you can get training or you can learn information or whatever out there. You cannot make a decision in those meetings. The only way you can make a decision is at a formal council meeting. So what I thought we'd do, and I spoke to a few other councils about how they deal with this, and in fact Redland City Council was probably the one that was the most advanced in their thinking, and I'm fortunate enough to get a copy of their policy, which I then adopted to our scenario. And that is that the policy recognises that it's normal and a usual process to have workshops. It recognises they're not a decision-making forum, and that the same rules for dealing with conflicts of interest apply. For most of the time, this will be quite simple. So if you have a prescribed conflict of interest, whether it's a council meeting or a workshop, doesn't matter, you're out of the room, very clear, it's very black and white. Where it's a declarable conflict of interest, I want councillors to be aware that in the short term, I think it's going to cause a few difficulties until we get some precedents in place. That the workshops are not a decision-making framework, so you can't make a decision about whether or not a councillor stays or goes. Only a council meeting can do that. So where you've got a council meeting, and I'll pick Councillor X, whoever that might be, might have a declarable conflict of interest in topic A. And if we hold a workshop on that and that matter's never come before council, the way that this draft is structured is that the councillor would need to make their declarable interest and leave the room. They wouldn't have the option to stay.
Actually, the situation arises where you've been away.
Okay. Yeah. Until there's a council decision to say that in relation to topic A, whatever it might be a member of a footy club or whatever it might be, that you only have a declarable interest and you can stay in the room. There's a council decision to that effect. If we have a subsequent workshop, then that ruling would apply and you'd be able to stay. So in the short term, until we set up a number of precedents or have decisions in relation to that stay or go, I think it might cause a bit of grief for some individual councillors, but I think it's the best way to go. So that's my recommendation.
The other challenge that seems to arise is that a lack of prior knowledge of exactly what may come up in a workshop.
Correct.
When something arises in a workshop, the need to then suddenly say, call a halt and make that declaration at that point in time.
I think that's a fair comment. Look, probably 90% or more of our workshops have a defined agenda. We're going to talk about X, might be.
But things do arise in conversation.
Correct, but the conversations are a bit more free-ranging, and that's one of the reasons you have these workshops, is you can explore ideas and talk about concepts, and they can wander off into different places. And that could be a bit more problematical, Joe, I think that's right. But there's not really a sensible alternative under the current legislation, because the only place you can make the decision is in a council meeting about whether or not that person can stay or go.
Can I ask Brett, in regards to recording of the workshops, the policy states number 7 that the briefing sessions and workshops are closed to the public, and because they're not legislated decision-making forums, there's no expectation that they need to be live streamed. Can I challenge that and ask, in line with just good governance and transparency, should we be looking at perhaps just providing notes? I notice, I think the policy also states that the notes are not for public.
Because and probably the thinking around that is that because they're not decision making. I'm just trying to think of a recent example. We don't make decisions, so what do? We talked about topic X. We might have covered 50 things or whatever it might be, and we don't run a full note-taking service in those workshops. If it was a decision-making forum, that would be different, but the fact is it's not a decision-making forum, and that's the reason.
Okay.
Just on, sorry, now I've lost my page. In regard to teleconferencing, sorry, on page 37, number 5 of the standing order says the chairperson may allow a councillor to participate in a council or standing committee meeting by teleconference. So I'm just questioning that in alignment with under the local government regulations under 254. K says that they can be, attendance can be by audio link or audio visual link. Does that go far enough to correlate with the local government regulation, or does it mean effectively the same thing? They just go a bit further. They say audio.
It's the same thing.
Audio link or audio visual link. Yeah. Okay, that was my question. Yep.
Brett, just back to what I was saying about good governance and transparency. Can we capture follow-up items or action items which are then available to the public?
Could you give an example?
I don't know. I'm just thinking that we've made that we've now just started live streaming and on the path of openness and transparency. To have some parts of that workshop, whether it's notes or follow-up items or something available for the public, so that they know what path we're taking before
for most of the current workshops, we don't keep notes at the moment, so we'd have to introduce that process to keep notes because we're not.
Okay, so I'm just introducing another level of reporting, which is, in your opinion, unnecessary.
And personally, yes, I think that's the case. But I'll think a bit more about that. Maybe we'll monitor and see how it goes 6-12 months and then come back and revisit that.
I was just thinking perhaps one of the bits of public information is in fact what was discussed, just the agenda item, and perhaps there's an option either to have it as a regular section in the subsequent report, because nearly every one of these leads to a subsequent report that comes out to the public saying, was this workshop, yes, on this date or something like that, or a monthly or quarterly, this is what was discussed.
Well, just the leading information to the report being generated as to where councils have met on the matter beforehand. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm just thinking that's one way that would be a legitimate way of people saying,
Victoria does a similar model to that, where they have, once they report, but a list of items that was discussed in the last month. But theirs also, from memory, and please don't quote me, it's a while since I looked at this, but theirs also from memory has a requirement that you need to list out what's coming up in the next month, and you can't have any workshops unless it's been identified in that council meeting. So in other words, you sort of locked in a month ahead and you have no flexibility. So
that wouldn't be good.
So I think I looked at the Redland policy, Brett, and they've got an objective which I notice our policy doesn't have. So maybe what we're discussing about having these workshops may be listed with agenda items. The objective, I think, there is to provide councillors the time to understand important matters in details, and listing those workshops are proof of that. I actually like where Brian's going with some workshops being available for the public, for public information.
it also shows we've taken the time and effort
Absolutely.
to
Get some back.
gather that
Absolutely.
background before going into
in
policy or decision making process as well.
In particular with significant matters, and we've already been dealt with that, and I think the public's owed just owed a little bit of information that we haven't made these decisions just quickly.
Joe?
Question for the CEO. With regard to what we've got here before us, from what we had previously, what has changed, particularly in the way of, just for the benefit of those that are listening or maybe watching, what has changed in the way of record keeping or minute taking that from what we had previously?
So we're looking at, you're talking about all of the things covered by this report, or just in terms of the...
No, all the things covered by that report.
Well, obviously we've got an updated code of conduct which is being changed by the state government, which applies to all councils across Queensland. Similarly with the investigations policy.
I'm mainly from a reporting perspective. Those are operational changes.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I'm just talking from with regard to what has to be documented, because you're saying, you know, workshops and that don't get documented. What does get documented?
Yeah,
what
sure.
has changed from previous?
So what has changed as a result of the changes to both the Act and the regulation from the 12th of October is that we, for example, publish the minutes of all of the council committee meetings. They are then adopted at the following meeting. Similarly, where matters are introduced into debate, where, well, I'll use an example, put photos up on the screen or refer to some type of document which people are using, that is also attached to the minutes, so that people who were not at the meeting but are subsequently reading the notes can see what was discussed at the meeting. They're the primary ones.
Thank you. It was a bit of a Dorothy mixer, but yeah. So I'm happy to move the...
I'll second it. Right, Joe?
I'll speak briefly towards it. I think, look, there are some challenges that some of these changes present, and we've faced them in some of the early stages already with regard to declarations of interest at workshop level, and that probably haven't necessarily been as clear cut in the past. I think reform for reform's sake is challenging, but the reforms that have been put forward here, I think, are a way forward. There always need to review any reforms and see how they're working, as has clearly been iterated with regard to the election of elected representatives that has currently come up as a result of a conflict at one council. But I see the reforms here as benefiting not only councillors and the council process, but the greater community in the long term, and I'm happy to support the changes that have been made. And but again, I think there's always scope for review and just seeing where these work well, and maybe may present more challenges than they try to fix.
Thank you, Joe. The councillors wish to speak to the motion. Councillor Stockwell.
I do so. I'm totally supportive of the regime and the review that led to this increased level of accountability at local government. I think we are seeing a couple of the perverse outcomes of trying to prescribe things like what a related party is. And we have in the last month already had a couple of times in a workshop session where what would normally be a very benign conversation which gives information to council, being a councillor like myself being excluded. And so they're the sort of things that will be, I suppose, minor downsides to get a much more transparent, much more accountable, and a much more, hopefully, less corrupt local government. Having said that, the LGAQ, in their advocacy on these issues over the last years or so, have been saying if it's good enough for local government, it's good enough for other levels of government. And this is where I think the greatest disappointment is. The level that we as local government councillors are now required by law, because we aren't a constitutionally recognised level of government, is so much different to what we're seeing, for example, in the federal government. So if we look at the press, we see about over $30 million for a land valued at $3 million. If you read The Guardian or Crikey, you talk about someone who's closely related enough to the Prime Minister that he was mentioned in his maiden speech and has since received over $40 million worth of federal government contracts, which they then didn't deliver, but delivered through subcontractors. These are the sort of things that the community should be really open about. It's not whether a councillor gave a $500 donation to the local charity who's then got to develop an application. If that's the level for local government, that's the level for state government, that's the level for federal government, and we shouldn't be afraid to request that these laws are consistent across all democracy in Australia.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell.
Can I just
Councillor
make one
Morrison.
comment?
Yeah.
Reading the reforms, I just want to draw everyone's attention to conducting meetings, and I'd like to just add that sometimes what we consider theatre and emotion can sometimes be misconceived as inappropriate meeting conduct, and I think we need to all remember that there's the potential that we're adversely impacting the reputation of council, but I think in this room we actually understand, I'm guilty of it, I've been over dramatic, so, but I think for perception and reputation of Noosa Council we need to really step back a little bit with some of our theatre.
Well, on that, I can say I guess I'm fortunate because I get to leave my acting on the stage. So I have that outlet. But as a general comment, in response to Councillor Lawrence's comments, I feel that in terms of meeting conduct, this group of councillors can be proud of themselves, the way they conduct themselves in the general committee. And the ordinary meeting, I think it's been exemplary so far, and for new councillors I think you're doing exceptionally well in the face of rapid and unprecedented reforms. As a personal comment, I am really pleased to see the way conflicts of interest have been defined under these new reforms. It's got rid of the very vague and undefined issue of perceived conflict of interest and what constitutes a perceived conflict of interest, and I think that is a great help. Now we just have to contend with declarable or prescribed, and the definitions around that appear to be very cut and dried, and it'll be interesting to see how they play out. I agree with the comments made that any level of reform that's intended to increase accountability in a level of government is healthy, but I also support the idea that it be applied equally across all levels of government, and I think governance in Australia generally would be better for reforms such as this spread across the three levels of government. And looking forward to reviewing any of these policies down the track, especially about how we may note what workshops councillors have attended, and that be perhaps on a website somewhere, so members of the public who may have an interest in that field can contact a councillor and get a sense of what was discussed. I guess it's important not to create an expectation that council is definitely heading in a certain direction before a decision is made. But there's certainly an opportunity, if it's flagged, to take on board a resident's perspectives before a final decision is made. The other councillors wish to speak to the Councillor Tom.
When I started practicing law back in California in the early 1990s, the lawyers were put down, and there was a public outrage through the 1980s about corrupt lawyers. And so the California State Bar put together these incredible regulations, and they were actually very difficult to deal with as a young attorney, and I was there, and it cost me a fortune to just continue the continual learning education part of it, and the legislation around what I could and couldn't do. It was phenomenal, and it just took so much effort. And then it ended up costing a fortune for me as a young lawyer to keep paying the insurance charges and to pay the bar fees. The bar fees were, and so I'm always I get a little bit worried about the LGAQ these regulations coming down on us, because I've just kind of seen it before happen again. And then after I left the practice of law in California, moved here, all those regulations just dissipated because the cost, the institutional cost of the bottle was so high that the lawyers just said, oh, forget it, it's not doing anything, and they scrapped the whole project largely. Anyways, so I'm always a little bit worried of the over-regulation of the LGAQ and the chilling effect, and worried that the regulations and the conflict of interest things move us to a point of where it actually takes us into a place of decision by sabotage, of looking at councillors' conflict of interest and taking us that direction instead of looking at the merits of a particular case and focusing on that. I just worry about that. It hasn't happened here in the room, but I worry about the top-heavy approach. And I just want to put it on the record that that is a concern for me about the LGAQ and the top-heavy approach to governance.
Thank you, Councillor.
I just clarify that it's not LGAQ's reforms, it's the Department of Local Government, the state government.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any councillor wish to close?
I'll close.
Joe?
No other councillor apart from
Oh,
me.
sorry, Joe. Yeah, I thought it was Brian. He's on a roll.
Look, I'm actually.
Can I have another go?
Look, look, I never cease to be amazed at some of the things that's thrown at us. There was an element of transparency that I think has been lost through some of this. I mean, we used to be able to acknowledge the fact that we had community memberships and community associations as an element of transparency, not for the fact that it was a conflict, just to put it out there. No longer required. We used to do that in this council when I first started. We don't do it anymore. I think that's an acknowledgement lost to some degree. Again, some of the things that are implemented here actually take away. But that's my own personal opinion. I'm glad Councillor Stockwell went to the next level. I was hoping to use that in my close, but yeah, consistency across all levels of government is something that I think the community deserves and warrants. And I hope we are the testing ground, and this will further. And that's all that this is. That it won't be long before state and federal governments start to adopt these sort of changes. It applies equally across all levels of government. I think that is important. I think that's vital to have that level of transparency and openness at all levels of government, for trust to come back to some levels of government, because it's distinctly lost. The party machines that control government at higher levels in particular make me worry about that. I also would like to see that these changes actually do make changes to council operating procedures, because a number of councils have been called by their communities for not having open and transparent processes, and I look forward to seeing a number of councils that have been called in that regard in the past to see their procedures actually change and have a more open and transparent process. As for how we conduct ourselves within council meetings, I hope we never lose passion. I don't see that as, and I know some councils may consider that a tactic, but I think passion and belief is what we're here for. That's why we've been voted in, and it's hard not to get worked up and about certain matters, because they do have feeling in our community, that they do have an impact on ourselves, and any element of government, of course, and any element of meeting, whether it be at the legal level in a court or around a table like this, there is an element of theatre to it that does go there. And if we do continue down that path, I see that as a good thing. And I look forward to introducing a new system of awards for at the end of the year, called the Amelias, so that passion and theatre isn't lost through the meeting process.
Love it.
Thank you. Put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous.
Just before we move off that,
yeah.
Chair, can I just acknowledge the work that Kylie did putting all this together?
Yeah.
She did a lot of research, did a lot of the drafting, a lot of the work on that
Thanks,
detailed
Kylie.
document. She did a great
Thank
job.
you, Kylie.
Thank
Thank you, Kylie.
Thank you.
So all future inquiries.
Thank you.
Okay.
The force behind the.
Absolutely.
Yes. Next one is the Infrastructure Services Department update, and we have our Director of Infrastructure Services here with us this this week.
Yes.
That's the only reason
Good
it's
morning.
here, so we can quiz Carl on any questions that come out of the quarterly report for that department.
Well, apologies for dragging this up to you, Carl,
That's
but
okay.
you weren't available.
No, unfortunately it wasn't.
That's in the Services and Organisation Committee agenda.
Page 98.
We
Page
did
98.
raise a number of questions with them. Did that list get?
I have got that list here. Do you want me to go through that? Or?
Yes, please.
That might
Okay,
save
that
a
might
lot
be
of-
easier. Excuse me. So first up, there was regarding the policy and process for dealing with planting and dealing with building in road reserves. So, and that was, there will be a CDF coming up, and we'll be requesting input from councillors as to how we do deal with the complaint process and deal with that community collaboration and consultation. The main thrust of it, though, is that we'll be trying to educate and inform residents about what is acceptable in the road reserve and why. However, there still will be a need for us to, where there's high risk situations, that we will have to issue infringements. But we're hoping by educating people and having a document that people can read, then they know what they're allowed to do in that road reserve and what they're not allowed to do in the road reserve. The next one was the Civil Ops Branch Workforce Review. For that one, we are currently working with People and Culture on a workforce plan. We have just engaged a maintenance planning coordinator, so they will be coming on board in the next few weeks, and that will address some of the issues that we've got with the supervisors feeling as if they're having to do a lot more of that planning aspect. And that really flows on out of the asset management planning that we've done over the last few years. So that's the next step. So we've been looking at the capital works and renewals, and now the next step is to try and improve the workflow with our maintenance planning. And one of the aspects that we'll be looking at is a bit like the tree strategy, where we actually will bundle work up, and then that will go out to the marketplace in the following financial year. So we'll have a better idea of what the work is that needs to be done. So we plan the first year, we do the next year. That's really what we're looking at doing, and there will be a cycle and it will go around the community. So that's the sort of process that we're doing. We're doing the same sort of thing with pathways, so we're doing auditing of the pathways, and then once we know where our priorities are, where the main risks are and where the concerns are, then we go back and we deal with those appropriately the following year. So that's that one. The other one is that we are setting up a focus group in the depots and calling in just key people, and we'll be walking through that process of how we're going to improve our processes going forward. Okay. The next one that I've got is the Botanic Gardens. So initial discussions with the Friends of the Botanic Gardens have taken place in the preparation of the MOU. We are about to put on a backfill person out of the Botanic Gardens, and I believe they have that skill set and experience of putting together the plan for that, and they'll be heavily involved with that. So that should be starting towards the end of this year and early into next year. So we already have some information in terms of reference materials from the Friends, and we'll be incorporating that about guided walks and so on. We'll be incorporating that into that process as well.
So just a question on that. We did have a strategic plan for the garden some years ago, so it's the next level of detail.
Yes,
there.
that's right, the next level down, yeah. The Cooroy Hinterland Playground, I think that was from yourself, Councillor Drusovic. So we are currently, we're in the process of engaging the contractor for the main body of work there, and we should be reaching the conclusion of that either late December and early January. That'll be coming back to council for approval of that contract to proceed. So that will be early in the new year.
Does that include the preparatory works, those civil works with car parks and all of that?
Yes,
Are they part and parcel, or are they two separate?
Two separate areas. So the Maple Street car park and the pedestrian crossing, that's about to go out to tender right now, and that should be finished by the end of the financial year. And then the next portion of work, if we let the contract for the main parcel of work, that will carry on to probably the end of 2021 for the construction works. That's all dependent on weather, of course, and whatever else we have come along in that in that area. So,
sorry, just going back to those car parks, how does that tie in with the current reseal works and car parking reconfigurations that are occurring currently in Cooroy?
Well, that's been taken into account with all of the planning. So we've also fixed up or replaced the Mary River Bridge down there. So we're joining up all of those different areas, and this is the last little parcel of work on that road. Yeah.
I'm just figuring how does it all fit within the parcel.
So we are not looking at any car parking down in that lower mill area at the moment. We're doing some work in that space and sorting that out, and that's going through the DA process, but that's a separate body of work, so that's not included in that body of work.
Any reseal work like to occur down there will wait till the car park's done and occur in conjunction with that car park work?
Probably yes, yeah. Cycling and walking strategy, I believe you've got a workshop on Thursday morning. So and that will be going through the draft strategy to update the councillors that aren't in in that group. The budget implications, including whole of life costs, and your say community consultation. Next was the SEMP. The SEMP has been reprogrammed just to take into account approvals.
For those listening, Carl, could you
sediment and erosion. Shoreline, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Shoreline erosion.
So that will be taking place. What we're doing is looking what the approval processes are for DNRM, fisheries, that sort of thing, and coming up with when this can all take place. It all depends on how long it takes to get those approvals through.
Sand pumping approvals?
Yeah. So we're looking at that, but it should be taking place in the next year sometime.
And how's the erosion tracking? You're keeping a watch on it?
We have been keeping an eye on that. I haven't heard any changes there. I'd have to go back and have a chat with our surveyors to get the latest information of what the movement is there.
Nothing evident or visible last time?
No. Beckman's Road, in terms of funding secured. So stage 1 funding for design and construction, which is the Cooroy Noosa Road intersection, that will be upgraded with a roundabout. So that's been secured. At this stage, we have not had any other funding secured for the remainder of the works on Beckman's Road.
Was that secured before the election was called?
Yep. Yes, it was. Yes. Yep.
That was a clarification whether it had been secured before the election or around the way.
Lastly, MOU with TransLink. So staff are meeting with TransLink at the moment. I believe the MOU is sitting with TransLink's legal department, but it is expected to come our way very shortly. It's a really high-level document. It's not going down into the detail of what we're doing with regards to electric buses or any of the other projects we'd like to work on. It's a high-level one. But what that will do is that will set us up for putting in place more detail regarding specific projects, and they might be the electric buses or a depot, free weekend buses, demand response transport, that sort of thing. We meet monthly to discuss that. The staff meet with TransLink monthly to go through that until we have an MOU in place. That's
so just to clarify, that means that the identification of potential electric bus depot sites in Noosa is on the agenda?
We have been considering where those sites might be, and it depends on what the model is that we use for delivery of that service. So at the moment, it really has to stack up from the contractor's perspective and TransLink's perspective as well. But we are assisting them with identifying those sites.
So just looking at your report, you've got here, next quarter, ongoing collaboration and negotiation with Kinetic and TransLink to develop electric bus proposal, including electric bus depot. Is Kinetic the contractor?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was it?
That was it.
Questions?
Yeah. Question time now. First of all, congratulations on the resealing of Cooroy. It is great pulling in there this morning. I didn't even notice that the difference between the nose in parking and the reverse parking. I just pulled up and I went, oh, that was easy, you know. so thank you for that. And,
so all of that nosing parking is now being implemented.
In that particular area, yes. We do this. We look at it on a case-by-case basis. So it depends on.
What I'm trying to clarify is that what we're doing across the whole of.
Generally, in accordance with the latest design standards, we are probably going to go to nose-in parking. But we do look at each of them.
Angle nosing parking.
Yes, correct.
Right,
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And then the second, there's a lot of work going on at the boardwalk on Main Beach. That we have, of course, we have Sails, we've got Netanya, we have Bistro C. Is part of the complete pathways and boardwalks and parks and playground assessment management plans, the AMP, would those improvements and other improvements along the boardwalk there fall under this? Because lately I've been walking up and down the boardwalk with my camera, and filming as I walk down on a hot day, and I just can see that things could be better utilized. Public space can be definitely utilized better along the boardwalk there. And because we have changes going on in front of all these other places, is it a good time to actually step back and have a relook at the amenity along the boardwalk on Main Beach?
As a whole?
Yeah, as a whole.
So there are a number of aspects to that. We did a trial about a year or so ago now for a new type of boardwalk, because the problem was it was very labour intensive to lift damaged boards out, and it got in the way. We had to divert people around. And so from a workplace health and safety perspective, we've now got a system that's more robust. The timber lasts longer. So we are trialling a couple of different types of arrangements down there. Once we've got an idea of which decking material lasts the longest and whether it, what's the most cost-effective solution, then we will be looking at extending that out along that whole boardwalk. There's another aspect to that as well, which is the steps down off the boardwalk down to the beach, especially after we've had erosion due to storm events. And so we are undertaking some work in that space as well, looking at the seawall and how we can improve that. So that's something that's being dealt with at a very high level at the moment, just looking at beach erosion, what are the mechanisms and how we could possibly improve that. And I think that would probably flow into what you're talking about. But yes, the AMP, the asset management plan for those will certainly will be taking that into consideration.
The drop-in, drop-out panel methodology, is that what we're still looking at?
Yeah.
Given that the boardwalk, Carl, is 1 year, just over a year old, how old is the...
But
I'm
Triathlon
making
weekend 2018.
So it's 2 years.
November 2018 it opened.
So the timber Cooroy, I think it is.
Yeah.
That's faring really well.
Yes.
So that material, I know it's expensive,
Yes.
but it'd be interesting to see how that wears over the years.
Yeah.
But so far, so good.
And we've put a panel of that in as well down on the main beach boardwalk. So there is one section there which has been done with that, and we want to compare that with how the other panels surrounding it, how they survive, because they tend to split, whereas this new material doesn't split, doesn't warp, so it's a lot safer for people to walk on. It's really good.
It's cooler too, because it's a lot of material. Wouldn't absorb the heat as much.
Yeah, that's right.
How would I monitor that, or just over the next year? Because it's not going to happen real soon. But how would I, as a councillor, sort of keep saying, well, Carl, how's this project going? What's going to happen? What can we do?
By all means, come and see me and we can have a talk about it. And what I can do is probably bring in some of the officers that are involved with that process, and they'll be able to keep you informed over time.
For the, if I may, just for the benefit of those, we had an item deferred from last month with regard to the temporary pathway down to the National Park.
Yes.
It hasn't been brought to this round of meetings. Can you, for those that may be listening online, can you allude to as to why that hasn't been brought to this round of meetings?
Amelia's just raised the point that some councillors had declared a conflict of interest last time this was mentioned. Is one required here now?
If you're going to deal with this item, the answer to that would be yes, or you can not deal with the
So
item.
any clarification as to why it's not this meeting?
You're still going to raise the issue that would arise. It's up to Councillor Terrace whether he wishes to pursue it or not.
I think so, and I'll read the
Yeah, I think it's to the benefit of the public to see why it's not at this meeting, and
Okay.
obviously in the meetings.
Okay.
I'll read the rest.
You need to declare why.
Yeah.
So,
Declare I have a friendship with Catherine and Andrew St. Baker, who have a property that fronts Park Road, and for that reason I'll leave the room.
Thank you.
Sorry for doing that unannounced, but
No, that's okay, because I actually have a declarable conflict of interest as well.
I'll just get the wording from last time, just a minute.
doesn't really rate the infrastructure services update, but
Clapping Kylie right now for actually a found.
quick.
Unbelievable.
Councillor Tom, that's the word you used last time, and if you're going to do it again, that would be the appropriate wording to use.
I, Councillor Wegener, informed the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter due to my association with Andrew St. Baker, who owns a property in Park Road, adjacent to where the pathway is located. Andrew St. Baker contacted me in May about the pathway in question, which runs on the northern edge of his property. I went to meet with him and looked at the path, and he told me the history of his dealings with council. I contacted the project officer and passed on Mr. St. Baker's concerns. Later, I informally met with the project officer on the boardwalk, and I believe he told me that it will eventually come before council. I have a perceived association with Mr. St. Baker as I am a surfboard manufacturer, and he is the owner of Thomas Surfboards and the Thomas Surfboard Factory. I believe Mr. St. Baker has a fantastic influence on manufacturing in Noosa. In council, I have often congratulated the Thomas Factory, and I've discussed the emerging enterprise business zones which Mr. St. Baker supports. During the campaign, Mr. St. Baker allowed me to put an election forefront on the Thomas Surfboard Factory. I occasionally meet Mr. St. Baker in the surf and have had 2 discussions of the Noosa biosphere, the history of Noosa, and the Bring Back the Fish campaign at his house, which is obviously right above the surf break. Although I have a declarable conflict of interest, I do not believe a reasonable person could have a perception of bias because I believe I do not have a close personal relationship with Mr. St. Baker. I therefore will choose to remain in the meeting room. However, I will respect the decision of the meeting on whether I can remain in and participate in the decision.
That makes some of mine look short.
I'll undertake the council resolution. The council note the declarable conflict of interest by Councillor Wegener and determine it's in the public interest that he participates. There's no voting, there is an element of voting. So there is an element of voting, and votes on this matter because council believes that Councillor Wegener does not have a close personal relationship with Mr. St. Baker, and therefore a reasonable person would trust the final decisions made in the public interest. As previously, do we have to go through this every time?
Yeah.
We still have to go through the whole process of it, even though it's been previously done.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
My understanding is that under the new process, we don't have to do this once it's been declared previously.
That is correct. But my advice to council is that you should go through the process because the minutes will need to reflect what happened.
Okay.
And I have a question to the CEO on that. Is a declaration that extensive necessary in this instance? Surely the pivotal issue would be the putting the election core fluid on Mr. St. Baker's yard, for example.
My advice has been previously, is that the declaration needs to cover all elements that lead to the conflict of interest. And if that is what Councillor Wegener declared last time, the same issue again, he should declare the same matters.
Okay. If we can go back in time prior to the declaration being made in the first place, would a declaration that extensive be necessary?
Again, it's up to the councillor, but my advice to the councillors is always, when in doubt, declare everything that you might. better off putting something in than leaving it out.
Okay.
Need a seconder.
I'll second it.
Seconded, Councillor Mayor Stewart.
I think for the sake of consistency in how we previously resolved this issue, I believe that the resolution is appropriate.
Okay, anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Put the motion. Those in favour? It's Councillors Stockwell, Juricevic, Finzel, Stewart and Wilkie. Councillor Wegener did not vote. It's carried unanimously.
I'm sorry I asked the question now.
I guess this is what you meant.
I wanted an answer for 20 minutes to get there.
This is why I seated Councillor Terrace wishes to pursue the matter.
Yeah. Now this goes to your comment, Joe, about how it has made the issues a bit more opaque.
Well, that's right. It
clogged up the system a bit.
I might ask the question now.
Yeah, what was the question again?
I forgot.
So basically,
last meeting, the issue of the temporary pathway was deferred. Hopefully, come to this round of meetings, but it's not on the agenda. This round of meetings, can you please explain why and when it may likely?
We're undertaking a more thorough review of the design standards, the path network in the area around Park Road. We're also having some discussions with local residents in the area. And based on that, collecting all that additional information, and also due to the workload that we're currently, we've got on at the moment in the lead up to Christmas, we've decided to defer that report, and it will probably be coming up in the February round.
The same staff member, Joe, the same staff member's also doing the transport strategy over Christmas.
I dare say some of that's due to a direct relation to the questions that we raised in regards to that. Thank you.
Sorry, are you saying they're having another look at the matter in relation to what?
We've got some correspondence coming in. Local residents are wanting to have a discuss. They've come up with some additional other options, and so our staff are trying to review that and come up with what would be the best solution.
Okay, so it may not necessarily be the same recommendation that came from staff previously.
Possibly it could be different, yes, correct.
So while we're on it, as a result of the representations of Mr. St. Baker, he quite clearly identifies that the technical term for what happens down there during when the surf's up is chaos. As part of that review, would it be appropriate to look at the pedestrianisation of the end of Park Road near the National Park? I.e., the previous report talked about the benefits from a pedestrian perspective of a walkway. Some of the concerns is about the dangers of traffic. I think if we're going to step back, we should step back and say, should this area all be pedestrianised?
Good point.
I will raise that with my staff, but that is a fairly large change in the scope of work.
On the basis of
I'm just thinking there could be, like, even initially just through painting of the road, to make it very clear around the roundabout.
It's a shared area.
It's a shared zone, you know.
Yeah. And again, that would need to be considered in light of the, Australian design standards.
That was around the elements of questioning that I wanted to have with staff with regard to what the standards were and whether they could be met in that area. So.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks,
Carl. Was it?
Thanks, Carl.
I'll move the committee recommendation that the director's report be accepted.
Seconded Mayor Stewart. Do you wish to speak to it, Joe?
I need to acknowledge the work done by the department, the comprehensive amount of work that you have on your agenda, the challenges for staff in delivering the program that we've got this year, and to thank you and your staff for all your efforts.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Carl.
Put the motion, those in favour. That's unanimous.
Thanks, Carl.
And Councillor Lawrence, you can return. Now on item 6, which is a report Director General Committee, which is the Noosa Council 2019-20 Annual Report. And we have Deb Yetzi and Guy Stewart from Governance. Welcome.
Hi.
I think I had a question in this.
Questions for staff, councillors?
I'm going to go back to the report.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of people listening at home, what is the significance of an annual report, and what can ratepayers and residents hope to glean from it? Why is it important?
Okay,
The council produces one of these.
All right. Well, there is a requirement under legislation for us to do that. What it does do, it makes it's from a transparency point of view very clear about how council has performed over the last 12 months, and there are set things that we need to report. We need to report about our complaints. We need to report our financial performance, and then also our progress against our major plans and strategies. So some people refer to them as coffee table books. You know, a lot of annual reports become very complex and often deter people from reading them. We've tried to actually make this a readable document. It is a lengthy document. The second section, which deals with all of the financial performance, again has to meet our financial reporting requirements and audit standards. So it provides reassurance to the community and to the public that, you know, we've got our house in order, and outlines our performance so that they can have confidence that we are travelling okay. So,
and how and where the money was spent.
Yeah. And there's quite a bit of commentary in there that's provided by the various, like for example, the CEO and other people as well, in relation to particular projects and how we're performing, you know, highlights as well. So, yeah.
I did have a question in reading through the report, and most of it I was on top of and have done, but there's page 55, investment property, map 13. I noticed the value of investment property decreased this year. I'm just confirming whether that was, as the second line appears to allude to, there was a re-evaluation that occurred, or whether there was any other change to council investment property, and what council investment property, for the benefit of those listening, what council investment property may consist of.
Sure, Joe. So what you talk about here is the financial statements.
The financial statement, yes, on page 55, sorry guys.
So investment property, so places like Sunrise Beach, shopping centre, they're done on an annual basis based on total rent. So you look at capitalising your rent and working out what the value of the property is. Obviously we've had some vacant shop there, and therefore on the annual revaluation that was valued down a little bit.
So the change there is only based on Sunrise.
55.
I'd have to check that.
That was my understanding. But looking at it again, is somebody reading that with no explanation there might have questioned why there was a devaluation. So I just want to clarify for anybody watching what that was associated.
Is that here, Joe?
Page 55, page 22. Page 55 of the actual report, page 22 of the financial statements.
22 of the financial statements.
22. Yeah, in the
Thank you for confusing us completely.
Page 55. My report says page 55. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm waiting through the report as it comes through with the PDF.
Page 22.
Page 22 of the financial
reports in the annual report.
Yeah, so note 13, investment property. The Kylie's got up on the wall. Thank you, that was it.
So you'll also notice that it's a bit of a different look. It's a fresher approach, and so just want to draw your attention to that. So,
which makes me leads me to my question, Deb.
Yeah.
Impressive and really easy to read. So congratulations on the report. I think it's brilliant and resident friendly. And I think you're right. When you overcomplicate the material, it has no worth because no one reads it. Finance on page 5. There's a note that the graphic design was outsourced at a cost of $1,200.
Yes.
That's good value.
It's exceptional value.
Content, fantastic. So we don't have any graphic designers in-house?
No, we have some design skills, but not to this level. And what I'd say is, while the graphic designer assisted us with layout and look and everything, which was wonderful, the content, the staff actually spent a lot deal with the content. So, but yeah, the designer did a wonderful job. No, we don't. Some bigger councils do have graphic designers on staff in their comms and in those areas, but no, we don't. So it's actually quite a cost-effective way to deal with it. Yeah,
just outsourcing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We should, lots of great graphics and photos and drone footage. We should let Sunshine Coast Council that even though the foreground of the front cover is in their shire, that we're not claiming it.
Well, regional perspective.
Actually, quick question. That house right there, this one,
Yeah, that's Sunshine Coast Council.
that's the Sunshine Coast Council.
Yeah, the tree line at the base of the south of Mount Cooroy is about the boundary.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Isn't that interesting? Because that is just such a showcase, such a example of Noosa.
And so what you're looking at,
council.
what you're looking at there is you can see how Mount Cooroy is the headwaters of 6 Mile Creek, which runs down into Lake McDonald. So stuff that runs to the south of Mount Cooroy goes out into the Maroochy River system.
Yeah. It's a great picture. There's some really good pictures in there.
Councillors, questions for Deb? Or someone like to move?
I'll move it.
Mayor Stewart has moved it, seconded Councillor Finzel. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Deb and all the team and all those involved. There's a lot of hard work reporting and collating goes into this report. I think the report demonstrates the width and breadth of all of Council's initiatives, its programs, its assistance to the community, its infrastructure development and so forth, and our staff should be commended and thanked. I thought it also highlights a wide range of grant recipients who receive funding from Noosa Council, and this is such a significant diversity of activities involved around this: sporting, environmental, community and cultural. And it's wonderful to see this as it really is on mission, and many of these organisations and individuals could not have progressed without assistance from Council, and I think that's something we should all be very proud of in regard to funding. And when I look at the corporate plan on page 20, the overarching themes: environment, community, economy, long-term planning, excellence as a council. These themes are all great ones and they're incredibly important. I think now more than ever, when we look at our corporate plan going forward, we have an opportunity based on these themes to look holistically when we make decisions and to look at recommendations put forward to us in light of all these themes, including social and economic impacts. As we make our way out of COVID and we confront the full impacts on our community, we address our housing crisis, our accommodation shortage, our accommodation and our average economy, our wages. I think that it's not just obligatory, that it's mandatory that we must look at all of these factors when making decisions, and I look forward to working with other councillors as we develop our own corporate plan going forward. As we move through the annual report, I'd also like to acknowledge the corporate services team. The reason we are in such a strong position financially compared to many other councils is because of all the hard work, diligence and prudent decisions which have been undertaken by Michael Shave and his team, and this hard work is appreciated and acknowledged. I'd also like to thank all staff, CEO Brett DiChastel, all directors and all departments, Kerry Contini, Deb Iezzi, Kim Rawlings, Carl Bellingham for their hard work, leadership and support. This year, as we have often said, has been a year like no other. On top of dealing with a global pandemic, more grants than ever received before, a bigger capital budget than ever before, more infrastructure projects on the go, more community organisations to help, more developments to be approved and increased governance requirements to be approved. They have all had to contend with a new council and 4 new councillors who have leaned on them for information and advice, and I personally thank them for their continued patience, support and advice, and I look forward to working with them all as we move forward to a bigger and brighter 2021. So thank you.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Amelia.
I also want to take this opportunity to thank the staff for preparing a comprehensive summary of Council's performance over the last 12 months. It's impressive and gives us an idea of the distinct and important role that local government plays in community governance, and in particular how impressive our comparatively small council is. Running a council that owns, and I have to say this over and over again, a council that owns over $1 billion in assets requires more than a skill set. It requires good people that are driven by desire to make a difference to a community and a place they feel passionately about. I'd just like to recognise these people and thank them and tell them that you guys inspire me.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Joe.
Piece of cake. What's a billion? It's only a couple more zeros.
I'll have that. Thank you.
Look, I'd like to concur with the sentiments of the Mayor and Councillor Morrison. I'm sure all the councillors around the table congratulate staff for an annual report in probably not only an election year, which always brings a transition and a challenge in itself, but in a COVID year. This has certainly been one of the most challenging times. I mean, the last 3 months of that financial year, from the election to where the report ends, barely scratches the surface of the challenges that we've had. I think staff and the CEO, in his management of it, the incoming council and the incoming mayor have done an amazing job. So I commend the mayor on her message for only such a short time in office as well. So well written and well received. I think kudos to everybody involved in that. I think it does show that our DML amalgamated council, we may be small, but we do punch above our weight. well and truly, and the report reflects the elements of good governance, good financial and fiscal management, and good staff management from the top down in this organisation, and is a credit to staff at all levels across the organisation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Councillor Stockwell.
Yes. One of the things I always find interesting about the annual report is the top 10 highlights, because that sort of gives you an insight to where the organisation thinks are the key things that they reckon we did well and we got right. And so this year, they're not numbered 1 to 10, but top of the pops was supporting residents, visitors and businesses through the 2019 bushfires at Peregian Beach, Cooroy, North Shore and Tiwa during the emergency phase and through recovery efforts.
Yeah, I completely got that.
Now, COVID has been something we've been focused on since March, but one can't underestimate the brilliant job that our staff did and our local disaster management community did through what was a record or a disaster that we hadn't experienced before.
Thanks for highlighting the fact that I forgot to mention. And
that was Christmas. Well, it started early in spring, didn't it? So we had this spring and summer of a climate that we hadn't experienced before, and staff whose day job is to make roads became people who were organising disaster relief centres. We then go to, the flip side, the reopening of the Noosaville Aquatic Centre after a major refurbishment, where millions of tiles were regrouted and solar put on the roof. So our role in providing, active recreation and sport for our community. One that I might have put at the top of the list, completing the new planning scheme after 4 years, and new councillors coming in here and having to try and grapple with something that we'd had over 50 workshops to understand. Redevelopment of the Noosa North Shore campground, providing additional powered and unpowered sites just in time for it to be unlawful to actually camp. Managing the transition of the new council following the local government elections. Well, councils, we mustn't be that difficult, we're only number 5. Support all members of the community through the 2020 coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, through the height of the lockdown and the ongoing recovery phase. And once again, this disaster or this emergency response, and we found within our organisation a skill set that's of international renown in some cases, of such that the Queensland government tried to poach some of our staff because they realised they had skills that they needed, and our own, the way that we worked through that early phase. And even though we're probably one of the first communities to be substantially impacted, that's where it stopped. Supporting, including a multi-year environmental grants program which allocated $750,000 over 3 years to support projects that aligned with the environment strategy. And yes, that was my idea in 2016, and we got there 3 years later. So councillors, the new councillors, it takes time to get some of the concepts, and that was, when I say my idea, that was the idea that came out of an informal meeting I had with a range of community groups in 2016. Adopting the master plan for Noosa District Sports Complex and the Cooroy Sports Complex, obviously once again in the recreation area. Success of the free shuttle bus loop in the holiday period, Go Noosa, which saw a further 20% increase in public transport use during the busiest times of the year. So there's not many places that can get a 20% increase in public transport to make the experience of Noosa during peak times something a little bit different. And finally, introducing a suite of new online services to assist the community to access information and conduct business. And the decision made very early in the de-amalgamated council to go to cloud-based computing meant that our staff seamlessly transitioned to working from home, and the productivity was hardly noticeable, the productivity change. So I think it has been a historic year. I think there are 10 great points to highlight to our community, and like everyone else, I appreciate all the work that goes both in the outdoor and indoor staff to make us look good when we produce lovely glossy reports with pretty pictures.
And I'm sure that Brett will take the those accolades back to staff, but I'd also really like to acknowledge the work that Dee has put into compiling this report, and the work that Sue does in the governance area as well, because she's had a big input to this report.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to recognise that,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Is it D or die?
It's Die.
I call it Dee.
It
Doesn't matter. What's she going to say to me?
It's a D or die report.
D or die.
There's a song in that.
Yeah. Look, yeah, I think other councillors have summed it up really well. We are a small council with a relatively limited budget, but what has been achieved because of ambitious targets set by the council team and also the executive team and staff is something the whole community can be proud of. But it is the staff that have to execute all the budget initiatives and the capital works, and also contend with things that happen from left field, like bushfires and COVID and all our councillor-driven requests that pour in on a daily basis, which adds further to your workload. So really, it is this report is really is a testament to what the staff have delivered, and I feel very grateful to be working with such professional staff who are very hardworking and who are passionate about living and working here. Well, working here, because those of us that are lucky enough to live here make up about 50% of the staff numbers, I understand. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Finzel.
Thank you. One last comment, because it's all been said and everyone has been so eloquent in their comments today. But I'd like to say my congratulations to this report and to the staff. The challenges and opportunities of 2020 have certainly been managed and delivered with excellence as a council. And thank you to the Mayor, to Brett and all the councillors and the staff for their good work. We are, of course, different by nature, and as we proceed forward, I'm looking forward to 2021, where we continue to deliver such excellent outcomes and transparency for our community. One last comment I would like to make mention of is the Noosa Council's endorsement of the Uluru Statement from the Heart that came out of the LGAQ. So thank you, everybody, and we're looking also forward to our break. I hope everyone has a well-earned rest and comes fresh to next year. So thank you.
Well said, Councillor Finzel. Any other councillors to speak? Councillor, would you like to pass?
No,
okay. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you. The next item, Report Director General, is the Financial Performance Report for October. It's on page 6 of the General Committee agenda.
Page 6.
Again,
Happy-ish days.
On track.
On track.
It makes your interrogation a lot less fun.
This building application fees seem to have been consistently above budget, COVID or no COVID.
Correct. So
What's going on?
As far as I understand it, the building industry, for for
Didn't
applications.
seem slow.
Hasn't slowed down to the extent expected at this point in time. It's still healthy, so we'll continue to monitor it coming into our third budget review, BR3. Obviously, I understand it can be cyclical, so it could slow down later in the year, but at this point in time, it's both building and plumbing.
But were those figures reviewed as a result of COVID? Were they downgraded as a result of COVID? With the
No,
were they maintained?
No, they were maintained.
Okay. Excellent.
So it's above normal, Joe.
Yeah. I expected that all the figures had actually been adjusted down as a result of COVID, but some figures clearly weren't.
No, really the budget COVID assumptions that were put through at the budget focused on our facilities and those permits for businesses shutting down and leases.
But on the flip side, that's why you'll see the budget to actual for holiday parks and so on is much higher because we pull those back.
Well, yeah, and that's the positive result that comes out of this. Make a comment. Yeah, that there seem to be a lot of as a result of those COVID changes. It seems that we're recovering faster than expected because we did open facilities sooner than expected and the rest of it. So the figures are seen in a very positive light by what's presented.
Trent, in regards to our borrowings, where are we up to with the debt restructure review with the Queensland Treasury Corporation?
Michael and I are currently working with Queensland Treasury and working through and analysing the options available to us, and it's our intent to come through to hopefully the next council meeting or the one in January to present the outcomes, and that will then obviously inform any decision we make with Queensland Treasury about the debt and also support the numbers for the budget preparation for next year as well, because it will obviously change our position leading into the next year's budget. So we should have a position for you in the next month.
So positively benefit council?
Correct.
Great.
So they post-election they haven't changed it?
No change.
They're still happy to look at COVID recovery mechanisms?
Correct.
Fantastic.
And that brings me to interest received. Interest from our cash invested. Given that with recent interest rate cuts, again, are we expected to derive some benefit?
Not from interest received. So if anything, with the RBA's rate cut, that obviously in turn puts downward pressure on our interest rate for the money that we earn in the bank. But as you can see, we've obviously still been doing quite well.
Yep.
With the investments we've chosen and keeping our money with QTC, we've still achieved quite a good return, which I think you'll see right there on the screen is the investment return. We're still achieving well above market with our investments. So that's why we're still, which is why we're still slightly above budget, is we're still achieving above market rates.
Councillor Stocker, you have a question?
Oh, if I did, I forgot them.
Okay.
Grant, you might say, for the benefit of those reading the report, sorry, Kylie, can you just scroll down just a fraction? No, the other way around. Scroll up, I should say. Don't stop there. Net financial liabilities ratio, just that thing there. The targets there, the first target less than 60%. The final one being minus 48.7%. That seems like a strange figure to see in a financial report. Why do we achieve such a value and it's so far exceeding the less than 60% target?
And that financial liabilities ratio is about our ability to pay off our debt. Now we obviously look at our value of our debt less what our current assets are. So if a business were to wind up, the first thing it would use its cash in its bank to pay off its debt, and then whatever's left it would then need to use its annual revenue to fund it. So by having a negative ratio, we're basically saying that we've got more cash than we do debt.
And is that value as high as it is because we've just it's around rate time and we've got a lot more cash in bank we haven't spent?
Correct. So if you
that figure will squeeze and adjust as the amount of cash that we have between rating periods.
Correct. Goes. So that value will be less, will continue to decrease back to zero as we get closer to December, January, when the next rate run comes through.
Trent, is it an opportunity to be a little bullish now with our spend and take on, bearing in mind with the infrastructure that's currently going on and our capacity, but is there the opportunity, because we have low debt levels and they've never been lower, the banks have never provided lower interest rates at the moment, and we have such strong cash holdings, is there an opportunity to be a little more aggressive in our spending for next year?
What we will do with the budget process for next year is we'll obviously, with our capital works, we will look at what the appropriate funding arrangements are to see what is the best outcome for both today's ratepayers and future generations, because obviously if we borrow now, it's 20 years worth of fixed interest. The consideration will also be that if we do refinance through this opportunity with Queensland Treasury to refinance our debt, we'll find the net financial liabilities ratio will actually contain us a little, because we'll have to refinance all our borrowings from example, some of our old debt is due to expire in 4 or 5 years' time. We'll be resetting that and reborrowing that for a further 20 years. So what it'll do is it'll reduce our borrowing capacity somewhat. So we just need to be conservative and aware of what our borrowing capacity looks like over the next 10 years if we take advantage of this loan borrowing opportunity now.
Probably that's a follow-up from your question. The opportunity, I think, over the next 2 years sits around the grants from other levels of government. And if you're going to spend 2 types of money, you're better off spending someone else's than your own. So if we can get more of those grants, but then there's the ability to deliver that in our capital program, because the team's pretty well at capacity now.
But there's a
what
risk,
else is going to come?
But there's a risk to that too, isn't there, Brett, where at the moment we're relying so much on grants to fund these major infrastructure works. When that money expires, there's still this whole of life maintaining.
There's 2 elements to it. One is if you build something new, it's the old thing about beware of free money. You know, here's $5 million, go and build yourself a new swimming pool. Well, guess what? The cost of running that pool over the next 10 years is going to be more than the free money you got. So there's that element, but it's also, as I said, do we want a new pool? Okay, well that, you know, you're chasing money because it's there, or you try and set your strategy. And if money's going to support that strategy, then you chase it. Not change your strategies just because there's free money going. So you've got to be very careful when this amount of money is washing through the system, that you don't change your priorities just because there's money available. Look at what are your priorities, and then how do you get the funding to do that. And if you get someone else to pay for it, that's even better.
Which brings me to the asset management plan. Where are we up to with that? I imagine that's part of our risk. That's not listed, but that's one of the risks that needs to be updated.
I'd have to take that on notice, Councillor. I'm not sure where the asset management plans are.
Yeah, so Carl can answer that, but he's working through. They've got the pathways one coming up. I can't remember the date. And also playgrounds. Thursday. We're not following.
Just a note, because it always, every time I read it, I say, oh, why are we that bad? The net financial liabilities ratio, I think there's some graphical improvements. Maybe, you know, like the one above's got a red line. So if you had a red line at 6%, it said maximum permissible or something, you know, had the one below goes red, yellow, green, so you know it's good. So something to indicate that negative is good or below 60% is better. Okay. You know, just
that's why I highlighted, because it looks like such an odd.
I'll have a go at restructuring that draft for next month onwards. Can do.
Carl, can I just get you to scroll down to the rate arrears one? This is the one that, as a council, we do need to keep an eye on, because it really tells about our community's capacity to pay the bills. And so far, so good. This is the one where we weren't too sure what that profile would look like, but what we're not seeing anything out of the ordinary in terms of how people are paying their rates. So this is really the first full run through. We'll keep monitoring that. I personally think that the next one, the February run, will be more interesting.
Once the federal government stimulus starts to decrease and continues to decrease.
But the good news is that there's no bad news yet.
Yeah, that's good. That's good news.
All good.
I just have a question.
You can ask the question.
Yeah, just in regards to the conversation around the grants, on page 8 under operating grants and subsidies, just a question you've raised about the position if the government discontinues the prepayment approach, in particular relating to the disaster resilience and recovery. What are you thinking if that does change?
There's two separate issues here. The disaster resilience and recovery was essentially upside for us. It was unexpected grant money that we had come through from the fires last year, so that's good that we achieved some reimbursement for that. In regards to the comment about the 50% upfront, it's purely just cash timing. So each year we receive a grant, financial assistance grant. It comes in 2 tranches during the year. For the last 3 years now, they've paid half of it up front the year before. So we'll still get the cash. It's just a case of it turning up in their bank account 6 months later in the year that they decided, if they ever do, to go back to its normal payment profile, we'll cop $1 million hit to the bottom line.
Okay.
But it's only purely timing.
Just the timing. Thank you, Trent.
My last question, I always raise this, I think, every finance meeting, legal expenses. Seems like we're a little bit up. Can you explain where we're up to as a percentage of total or as a percentage of year-to-date budget? I think we've budgeted 1.105 million and we've actually up to 447,000 already been spent, which represents 40% of the annual budget. So we're a little bit over. Is that concerning, Trent?
At this point in time, no. Obviously, yes, we are a bit over, and you'll see that for the benefit of everyone else on attachment 4, where the legal payments are separated as expenditure types. Is in a few different areas. As I mentioned last month, we've got some legal expenses where we didn't budget for in terms of policy development and legal advice on governance, HR and procurement matters, which are small amounts, but they all add up across the organisation. And obviously, on an ongoing basis, we track the legal expenses associated with development applications, and they're running slightly up at this point in time. But unless you see that continuing to trend up, and you'll see a BR3 budget review potentially come through if we do continue to track above budget. But at this point in time, being under $100,000 over, we're not too concerned at this point in time.
We go quite through December and January.
Difficult to forecast. Difficult to forecast.
It's not a linear function. It's not a linear function, is it?
No. So we might find that other areas there might be no legal, and there might be need for further advice, and it might continue to escalate. But we'll keep you updated each month as we come through.
And can you explain on page 18? Didn't understand commission paid.
Commission paid. So for a few of our facilities, we have a management rights agreement. For example, in holiday parks. So some of those contracts are based on a mix of fixed fee or commission based on the volume or whether it reaches a certain threshold. So that's what that's in relation to.
Quickly, carrying over debt from the de-amalgamation, I remember I was told that last year, 18-19, was $10 million was paid off of a total $40 million debt. And so there's assumably $30 million still outstanding from the amalgamation. And that's at a higher interest rate. So by renegotiating the debt, that debt at a lower interest rate, that'll help us. That's what we're really talking about, is this de-amalgamation debt and refinancing that to save a bit of money. Is that
there is a net benefit? Yes, there's a mix of. So we refinance at a lower interest rate, so we pay less interest. But by refinancing, it resets the loan for a further 20 years. So that means that there will still be a loan outstanding for a much longer period of time. But we get the cash flow benefit from that as well.
Is that the only way that it can be renegotiated over a 20-year period? Can it be renegotiated over a shorter period?
You get, as you'll see in the report that comes through next month, it will. The longer the term, the greater the cash flow benefit for council and its ratepayers.
Just to follow on that, since the amalgamation, we've been continually paying down debt, and in the annual report it mentioned that debt in the 19-20 year was reduced by 2.7 million. And looking at page 16, which is the statement of financial position, you've got borrowings under non-current liabilities sitting at about 19 million, and current liabilities, borrowings about 3 million.
Correct.
So does that mean a net debt of just over 20 million?
It's the two combined, 22. Correct.
22, yeah. We need a seconder for Joe's motion. Seconded Councillor Lawrenson. Joe, do you wish to speak?
Thanks, staff, for their diligence again. Seems like The COVID concerns that we had are less dramatic than we budgeted for, and hopefully the recovery will be faster and less impacting on our community than we budgeted for. So I thank staff on their caution and their zeal in making sure that we have a cautious budget going forward.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to speak?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment on council's success in managing the budget, and just take note that you've got everything on track, so thank you for that.
Well done, Trent. Thank you. Put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trent.
We now have a matter that is confidential. It relates, we've got a motion before us that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 254J3E, the Local Government Regulation 2012, for the purpose of discussing legal advice relating to an appeal in the Planning and Environment Court, so that Council's legal position is protected in relation to item 3, which is the Planning and Environment Court Appeal D144 of 2019, application for building works at 54 Seaview Terrace, Sunshine Beach. We have a motion that we go into confidential session.
I'll move that.
Moved Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Wegener. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Let us know when we're back, please, Kylie. Thank you, Kylie. Welcome back, everybody. Councillors, we have a motion before us. Someone care to move that? Councillor Finzel, seconded by Councillor Wegener. Councillor Finzel, you wish to speak to the motion?
What am I saying?
You don't have to.
No, no comment.
No. The other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Only to agree with the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Finzel, you wish to close? Councillor Stockwell, right.
I think it's important to acknowledge that settling this appeal is based on legal and professional advice that the outcomes negotiated in mediation address the bounded assessment criteria of the 2006 planning scheme, and we have been assured as a council this does not set a precedent under the existing or any future amended provisions relating to the current coastal hazard adaptation plan that we are likely to be going to the community with in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Finzel, you wish to close?
No comment.
No? Okay, we'll put the motion. Those in favour?
I think Councillor Lawrence.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Lawrence.
I support Council's recommendation to settle this appeal based on compliance conditions which have been formulated in conjunction with Council's expert. I think it's important to acknowledge in this case and moving forward that a risk approach based on the best and most relevant information is appropriate to inform planning and building land uses and controls.
Any more?
No.
No one else? Put the motion. Those in favour? That is unanimous. That is the end of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you.